It's pre-roll.
Well,
you know.
So lint. The spider's gonna get in your bag. That's a big one
Is it a wolf
too.
spider? Because if not, I don't really care.
It might be a brown recluse. So the Linton Hopkins, he was friends with Julian Van Winkle, the owner of Pappy Van Winkle. So they reached out to Pappy Van Winkle and to say, we want to use the Pappy Van Winkle barrels for the handles. And they were cool. They're like, yeah, we'll send you the thing. So they said, but we can't say that we're, this is officially Pappy Van Winkle because we work with Quentin Middleton Made Knives. He's a good friend of mine. Awesome knife maker out of South Carolina. He uses the Pappy Van Winkle wood, and he says it. So I can't make a whole big production. Pappy Van Winkle can't say, hey, we're making these knives with fader knives. But you can have it, you can use it, and you can say it, but we can't say anything. So the team with the chef, I don't know why he paid them too much. Tony, remember these phone calls? Yeah. They were absurd. It's just absurd. 10 people for these bullshit conversations on how many knives, what's the, using all these, this is a shop, we know, I'll make the knife, I'll get it to you. So I guess one of them wasn't listening and sent an email to Julian Van Winkle saying, we're ready to launch the Pappy Van Winkle fader knives, Linton Hopkins knives. Julian Van Winkle was furious because he said, I told you we're not really involved in this. This woman got, remember that? She got laced. And all we had to do was not deal. You didn't pay attention at all. So Pappy Van Winkle does do a lot of stuff with people, but they're very, loyal to this one knife maker. It happens to be a friend of mine. But it was, that was a disaster. Like, it's to the point where I don't even want to talk about it because it's just like, yeah, it's fine. Whatever.
Now you just got to find like another bourbon, okay?
Dude, the barrels are easy. Like, we just got a case of, we work with this one winery out in California named La Jolla, and they sent us the barrel heads, and we made 20 knives with the bourbon, the wine barrel, and we stabilized it and we made handles with that. So we've done that before. It's kind of neat.
Is there a reason why like barrels? Is it just because it's like you can reuse the wood?
Well, I'm under the impression, and I might be wrong, that for wine barrels, they're only used for wine once. That's right. Yeah. But the bourbon guys, they torch the inside of it, and then they can use those old barrels. The oak looks great, and we do a lot with oak barrels and stuff like that. A lot of kind of Hudson Valley walnut. I like to use local Hudson Valley walnut. So, there's a lot, man. Dude. Knife making. Listen to me. 45 minutes. I'm gonna scratch the surface. I'm gonna hit something, and you're gonna want to. And then all of a sudden, you're like, let's just keep going.
No. I mean, it might just be that we go really, really, really deep on one thing.
Whatever you want.
We might get in the weeds. So we're gonna try to not do like too much of the superfluous like background.
I'm
thing.
with you. Perfect.
But you are from New York City, right?
Yes, born and raised.
And part of the reason we're talking is because I met you through my buddy Tony.
Yeah. Which
means that you also have a connection to the restaurant world, even though you're making knives now. Could maybe just a little bit of that, so I know.
Because I was without the superfluousness, when I was a kid, my father was a winemaker in the Hudson Valley, one of the pioneers of winemaking in the Hudson Valley. So growing up in the 70s and 80s, we were very close with the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America. Uh-huh. So we were also, because having this winery in the 70s and 80s in the Hudson Valley was so unique, all the restaurants and all the cooks and all the CIA was very involved with what we were doing. So I was constantly around culinary guys. I went to school to be an artist. And as a freshman, I couldn't get into this class I wanted. I wanted to be a painter. My father was a painter. I wanted to be a painter. I ended up getting into a sculpture class accidentally, and then I got very involved in metalwork. And then when I graduated college, I worked for artists, and I worked as a fabricator for a lot of sculptors. I did a lot of work for restaurants. I did one for one restaurant, and I worked with Crate and Barrel. Crate and Barrel had a project in mind that they reached out to me. They said, this restaurant wants this specific project, and we want you to, can you meet up with the people from the restaurant? I said, yeah, absolutely. I had a studio in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. I was also, working for other artists. And at the time, I also started culinary school. I went to culinary school at night. I was working in the shop during the day.
Why? Why did you go to culinary school?
Well, I was so comfortable. My father's a winemaker. He also did a little bit of work at the Rainbow Room. And I was around cooks so much. We cooked in the house. I was around, Waldy Maloof used to hang out at our house. I mean, I have like chefs would be at our house because all these chefs, they want free booze and whatever. So they're at the winery and they're having a good time. He was very involved in the culinary scene. So it was like, it seemed like, well, I can do this and I know people. And so I was going to culinary school at night. I was working in my shop during the day. And then I got this call to do I got to do this table. It was the Charlie Palmer Group. The Charlie Palmer Group had a restaurant in Grand Central Station where the Apple Store is now. Where the Apple Store is now used to be a restaurant called Metrazor.
I remember that, yeah.
So Metrazor, they had, because it's in the middle of Grand Central Station, they couldn't set tables up downstairs because people would take them. So they reached out to me to build an unstealable table. Now this table couldn't be bolted into the ground at Grand Central Station. So they asked me to design an unstealable table.
That was the word they used?
Well, that's what I got out of it. They needed a 300-pound table. Yeah. So I built this table. The plate was like a 200-pound block of steel and all this stuff and everything. I did the drawing. I sent it to him. And they said, we love it. Charlie loves it. We want to meet with you. And then they gave me a time to meet. And I said on the phone, I said, well, I can't because that time I'm going to culinary school. They hired me on that phone call because they knew I had to get an internship because I was at now it's the Institute of Culinary Education. Now, when I was there, it was Peter Kump. So they knew I had to intern. And they said on that phone call, intern with us, we'll pay you. They hired me on the phone call. I came in, I made the table. It was just getting it there was a total disaster. Me and my metalworking friends schlepped this 300-pound table in the Grand Central.
How old were you?
26, 27. Oh, no, about like 25, something like that. So we brought it in and then he had me be the project manager for the Charlie Palmer Group. So what I would do is I'd help him build restaurants, but then because I had a shop, I would build things for, little places. And I was going to culinary school at night. I thought maybe, I was getting married. I thought maybe I could do this. Meanwhile, I really wanted to make sculpture and make art. And the funny thing was, before I met Tony, Charlie said to me, he was like, I know you went to culinary school. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to cook. So he said, well, if you want to cook in Oriole, you gotta do, you have to meet with the chef, Jerry Hayden, who was, rest in peace, an incredible chef.
1 second, just so everybody knows, Tony is Tony Aiazzi, co-founder.
Tony Aiazzi.
One of those. Co-founder of Shoebox and our mutual friend. That's how I met Geoff over here.
So Charlie said to me, he's like, look, Jerry is the chef at Oriole. You got to talk to him and you got to interview with him. And I said, okay, no problem. So I didn't know. He sat me down. And at the time he saw me going through the kitchens and fixing things. I was kind of like an upper scale handyman for the restaurants. And he saw me and then I think that he thought that I was Charlie's guy and I was going to get a freebie into the restaurant. So he kind of grilled me. And he said this one thing to me and he goes, well, I know you're a metal worker. I know you're an iron worker. What makes you think you can cook? And I said to him, like, well, be honest with you, metalwork and sculpture and cooking are the same. You have ingredients and proper technique and you're giving it to someone. So I really don't see the difference between, making sculpture and making food. I don't see any of it, the difference of it. And he says, and then he just looked at me with this scowl and he's like, okay, that was pretty good. And then meet you come in trail tomorrow. Yeah, that was some bullshit that he had never heard before. Yeah. That was some high level.
Damn it, logic? That was bullshit.
That was some high level horseshit. Highest level horseshit. And I've held on to that nugget because he was furious with that answer because it was like, so then I met Tony the next day when I trailed and we became friends ever since. And then Charlie said this experiment with you trailing in the restaurant. I need you doing other things. So I helped with restaurants and I helped with some of the things around New York. So I was running around to help project manage. And then we met Tony because one of the restaurants, they were going to gut it and bring in new people. And they wanted me to be the general manager and Tony and our other friend Scotty was going to be the chef. So they had us come down there and Tony and I worked together really well. So, all right, that's how I met Tony. We worked together really well, very parallel thinking in terms of what we needed to do. And then I went back into metalwork by working at a blacksmith shop. And a lot of people think, oh, blacksmith shop's the guy with the long beard shoeing horses. No, I worked as a fabricator at this metal shop, and we would do ornamental ironwork for, like, we redid the Dakota building, like the gates of the Dakota building, high-end ornamental ironwork. And it was also a blacksmith shop that taught classes. So we were teaching a lot of classes with blacksmiths from all over the world. We were teaching forging classes and tool making classes, and I was the assistant for a long time. So I worked in a couple fabrication shops, and then I started to help teach bladesmithing classes, which is like a blacksmithing class, but bladesmithing is actually, so what forging is you're taking steel, bringing it to a very hot temperature, and then as it gets hot, you're able to manipulate it with a hammer and an anvil, very much like the way you would manipulate clay with your fingers. But at 1800 degrees, obviously, it ain't gonna happen. So you gotta have an anvil and a hammer and then proper technique. So there are expressions like, I won't, waiting for, hit it while the iron's hot, or strike while the iron's hot, time's on your side. So I started teaching, helping teach blacksmithing classes and bladesmithing classes. And I realized that knife making is a lot easier than, it was fun. It was fun. And I'm not lifting anything over 25 pounds. And I started to make knives for friends. And I'm not a hunter, but I was a cook. I spent all this time with these chefs and friends like Tony. And then I started making culinary knives. And this was about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. So I started really focusing on culinary knives, and I got to the point where I needed to kind of not be making knives out of my backyard, out of my shed in my backyard. So I reached out to my friend Tony, who we worked together very well, and he became my business partner. And we've been making knives now for about 10 years, and it's been dynamite, and it's fun. And we work with chefs primarily. My focus is with like the home user. I think it's really important to provide a beautiful knife for the home user, and there you go. Those have, got in the weeds.
You got in the weeds a little bit with that, but it brings me to what I want to talk most about, because I don't know a lot about it, and it's funny because I think as chefs we probably don't know nearly as much as we should about knives. Right. And I was watching you on a couple of videos, and so I wanted to start with just like, we got a knife here. Yeah. Pretty dope chef's knife. The composition of a knife. Okay. So obviously I know there's a blade. Right. There's a handle. Bolster, right? Whatever that, maybe we could talk a little like what is the composition of a knife that we should know about? So
there's two real different, if you're talking about a chef knife, and then we're talking about Western style, you can get in the, Asian style and Western style. You have a full tang knife and a hidden tang knife.
What does tang mean?
Tang is where so the tang is the part that's in the handle. So like a full tang knife would be when you see the entire, when you're looking down the knife and you see the steel all the way around.
The cheap paring knife where it pulls off the
well, now we're getting into the back in the weeds, but yes, the answer is yes. So if you can see the steel in the handle, that's a full tang knife. Then a hidden tang knife would be like a sushi knife, or what the sushi guys use, where it's embedded in the handle. It's like a stick, and then it's kind of embedded in the handle, and you don't see any of the steel at all. So there's different qualities to the different types of knives. So a lot of times a full tang knife will be a little bit more balanced because you have steel on the inside of where the handle is. And the hidden tang knife is a little bit more blade heavy because there's not as much steel in the handle. But that's another thing. It's all very, questionable. There's the scales. That's what, if you have a full tang knife, the sides that are the handle parts that are riveted together are referred to as scales. And then the bolster is that transition between the end of the handle to the steel by the heel of the knife. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm telling you.
Well, so,
go ahead.
So when we think of what we want to look for
in
a good knife, and obviously some of it is subjective, some of it isn't like binary. It's not like it's better to have this versus that. It sounds like a full tang is going to be heavier, and maybe if it doesn't have that, there's more control or something. But what should we look for as like table stakes of a really good knife?
Weight and balance is a misnomer because it all depends on the size of the knife. So if you have a knife that's very long, you're going to have a different balance to a knife that's on the shorter side if the handle's the same. My opinion is, for most cooks, I think the full tang Western style chef knife is the most versatile. And usually when people talk about the length of the blade, when you measure the length of the blade, it's from the heel to the tip, the heel of the knife to the tip, not the whole thing. So an 8.5-inch chef knife, 9-inch chef knife, Western style knife are the most versatile and the easiest to use for the home user and for the professional, frankly.
Gotcha. So I also heard you talk about hardness. Yeah. I don't know what the hell that is.
Okay.
So what is hardness and how do you achieve it?
Beautiful.
I mean, that sounds...
I got you.
Okay, out of context, I got you. Within the context of a knife, what's hardness?
So all steel can't make a knife. In order to make a knife, you have to have a certain amount of carbon in the steel. So like if you went and got a piece of rebar from a construction site, there's not enough carbon in it to make it into a knife. So most knives that are culinary knives or hunting knives or hardenable knives, there's a higher amount of carbon in it. So what happens is if you take a wire hanger that you hang your shirt on, if you bend it, it stays bent, right? Well, with a knife, you don't want that because you want to flex. So what happens is every specific knife, there are thousands and thousands of different alloys that you can use. There's carbon steel, there's stainless steels, and most of those 4 knives are high carbon. So what each alloy has is a specific. Before your eyes roll in the back of your head, I'm going to give you the science, and then I'm going to make it very palatable.
Okay.
I promise.
Do it.
Give me 5 seconds. So
you can hear this, right? Okay.
So what happens is to harden a knife, every knife has a critical temperature. The critical temperature is where the iron carbides in the knife go into solution, and then you reach that temperature, you hold it at that temperature based on the steel it is, and then you quench it either in oil or water between plates. You want to bring it down to a very specific temperature. And what happens is the solution goes into a crystal structure. That makes it hard. Very much like creme brulee. So you have a pot of creme brulee, and then you put the sugar on top of the creme brulee. If you think of the sugar as the iron carbides, there's no connection with the individual granules of the sugar, right? They're just granules of sugar, right? But if you bring a torch, there's a specific temperature where the sugar all goes into solution, right? And then all of a sudden you have this soluble puddle on top of your fucking pudding or custard, whatever, creme brulee, right? Mm-hmm. So then there's that's the critical temperature of your sugar. And then as it cools, what happens? It turns into a crystal structure that you can knock through with your spoon. So that's what's happening with your knife. Now, with the creme brulee, you knock it through with your spoon, right? Well, if you harden the knife, that is the case too. If you just, you bring your knife up to critical temperature, you quench it in oil, and you drop it on the floor, there's a very good chance that it can break, can crack like glass, crack like the top of the creme brulee. So what you do is you put it back into the oven at a lower temperature. So let's just say, for argument's sake, for stainless steel, I'm bringing the stainless steel up to 1925 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'm dropping it down as quickly as I can, specific to the stainless steel, to below 700 degrees. Afterwards, it goes in the oven to temper. And what the tempering is you're bringing it to a lower temperature, 400 degrees, and that relaxes the iron carbides and everything in the knife, and then it allows you to be flexible. So there are different types of hardness, and how hardness translates to culinary knives. A lot of it is what the average user will notice is the sharpening. Because the harder the knife is, the harder it is to sharpen the knife. So there are ranges in which different knives are hardened. It's usually, when I get a customer who tells me about the Rockwell, the hardness, my eyes roll in the back of my head, because it's like you don't really truly understand what you're talking about. But at the same time, you can have very high hardness knives and very low hardness knives. And then as a knife maker, it's my job to give my customer what the best I think is the best. And that's hardness.
Got it. So it's almost like flexibility while still being durable.
You have to create the flexibility, because when the steel comes before it's hardened, I can bend it and it stays bent. Mm-hmm. But what I have to do is I have to transform it from being annealed or regular to, when I flex it, it flexes. When I bend it, it flexes back. And then you also, part of that hardness is you want to make sure that it's soft enough to work, but it's also soft enough to sharpen, but it also has to be able to hold an edge. And the tempering allows you to gain some strength and durability. And the way you heat treat allows you to have control over the durability of the edge itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking of like a fish fillet knife right now that like bends.
Right. Well,
really.
Here's what's interesting about a fish fillet knife. A fish fillet knife, a lot of it is I can heat treat a chef knife and a fillet knife exactly the same. And I'll have different results. And a lot of that's the geometry of the blade. So a chef knife, you look at this chef knife you have here, it's the thickness is 3/32, which is a little bit under 1/8 of an inch with over a 2-inch heel, right? So I have a triangle. The geometry is a triangle, right? But if I have a fillet knife that's only 1 inch and I'm starting at a 1/16 of an inch, it becomes, as thin as it goes, it becomes more flexible because of the geometry of the blade itself. So I'm not heat treating it any different.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then when you're buying like stainless steel, like I think about when buying it for, building out kitchens, you have different gauges.
Right.
You have to lower the gauge.
Yeah.
Is there a specific gauge you have to buy, or does it matter?
Well, most knife making steels or hammer making steels, I buy when I make hammers, I forge hammers for myself. You're getting very specific sizes from, you can't get it from home. I can't go to Home Depot and get some, 440C stainless. And I got to go get it from I got to get it from like a knife supply.
Yeah, go to Brooklyn or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I work with some local steel manufacturers that just sell to knife makers. Mm-hmm. And then they'll sell to, from the big guys like Gerber and all these guys to, a guy in his garage who just needs, enough for 2 hunting knives. So. Gotcha.
So I also read that obviously there's different methodologies of design, but it sounds like there's forged, there's templated, obviously Damascus, which is its own sort of ordeal. But do you have like a preference, or do you do different ones based on how you're, thinking about the knives, and maybe just a little bit of like, what are those 3 methods?
So there's 2 styles of knife making, and I'm being general. I'm generalizing it. There's forging a knife, where you're basically, like you're putting it in a forge, and then you're pulling it out and with the hammer, and you're taking it at its plastic stage and you're forming it into the shape that you want. And stock removal, which is you're getting steel at a specific size. Like, let's just say I want 3/32 by 2 inches. I will use a bandsaw or grinders and cut it out, or I'll use a water jet and then I'll have it cut out. So you're not really, it's not gaining or losing. It's just, it's a true preference. Like, especially there are certain knives that can only be forged, like with an integral bolster. And I'm sorry, I'm throwing it more at you. The integral bolster has like a forged lug on the front of it that you can't really, you'd be grinding this until the rest of your life in order to accomplish it. So there's the idea behind forging in and of itself. We used to be, back in the day, there was a very limited amount of material. You couldn't go and order, back in the, olden days, you couldn't order steel. You were making the steel. So it was such a finite material that you had to learn how to be efficient with it. So forging allowed you to be efficient with the material that you had, and you weren't wasting anything. So that's one of the reasons why hidden tang knives came about, because you're not going to spend all this time making a knife and then throw all of it into a handle. So you're going to make a long stick that's probably the garbage end, and then you're going to stick it in. So there's a lot of, so the forging has become, bladesmithing is a little bit more in regards to the skill of the knife maker. That also falls under what Damascus is, and we can talk about that if you want. But so stock removal is, I get steel in sheets and I cut it out, and then I'm able to just I grind it and heat treat it normally. Forging is more like you're taking raw material and then you're kind of imposing your will on it in technique, and then you're kind of massaging it into the, it takes a lot longer. There's more effort. There's more years of training in order to do it correctly. And it's just a question of, how do I pass on savings to my customer? And my experience as a blacksmith and a bladesmith was great. I mean, that's why I learned how to do that before I made knives. It was forging for railings and stuff like that. But I wanted to be able to I wanted to be able to pass on the savings to my customers. So I really used stock removal because it was a little bit less labor.
Yeah. Yeah. And from what I understand, Damascus is basically blending a couple different materials together, and there's like this organic pattern that arises. But I'd love to hear more about what that.
Yes. All right. So what Damascus is in Damascus in the knife making world in general, it's the synonymous word for pattern welded steel.
Yeah.
So you have what you start off with all the steel is high. We have stacks of high carbon steel and high nickel steel, and they're all stacked together. And then you bring it to a very high temperature, and then with either a press or a power hammer, or you have a striker with you, you're forge welding it together. You're kind of mushing it together, but you're creating a homogeneous piece of steel, right? So, but you still have those layers. So you do alternating layers. And then you draw it out like you would make a candy cane or something like that. So like a candy cane is perfect. Or I got one better for you, a croissant. You know, you have the butter packet, and then you have the flour packet, and then you're mixing them up, and then there are layers and layers and layers. That's the same thing with Damascus, except for you have high carbon steel and high nickel steel, and then you're forge welding it and then drawing it out, cutting it up, forge welding and cutting it up, and cutting it up and forge welding it, and then putting it to the knife that you want. Once you grind that steel and hand sand and get it ready, you won't notice that there's any pattern until you put it into an acid. And what the acid does is it eats the high carbon steel, and then the high nickel steel is resistant to the acid. So that's why you get those high contrast colors between the silver, which is the high nickel, and then the black, which is the high carbon steel. So what Damascus is Damascus for powder welded steel knives are, what they do is they show the craftsmanship and the skill of the bladesmith. But they're still carbon steel, so they will rust if you don't take care of them. They will patina when you cut your lemons for your margaritas. And they will react exactly like a stainless steel there's no added benefit to Damascus knife. There's a lot of bullshit going out that, this is the ultimate knife. It's fine. It's beautiful. They're wonderful.
It's more aesthetic than anything.
It's aesthetic, and it shows the skill and the incredible craftsmanship of the bladesmith.
Yeah, and those like circular patterns that show up in a Damascus knife, is that just naturally occurring when you dip it in the acid?
Good. So you can do different things to the billet, and what happens is you have these layers. So what you're referring to?
Sorry, what's a billet?
A billet is your friend. The billet is like a block. So when we refer to a block of Damascus that's not turned into a knife, it's referred to as a billet. So what you can do is different things to that, that stack. So when you see those circles, that's referred to as raindrop Damascus. And what you can do is you can actually take your block of Damascus that you forge welded and did all that thing, drill 3/4 of the way through, and then reforge it. And what happens is wherever those drill holes were, you kind of pushing it forward, and then you end up with this pattern that looks like raindrops. You can hit it with you can make a ladder pattern where you have these lines and they're forged through. You can do different things to the Damascus to get different outcomes, like a chocolate babka. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got it?
So, I mean, I want some chocolate babka. But
yeah, of course.
Do you have some here?
No chocolate babka. David, do we have any chocolate babka? No, you don't listen to me.
He's like, all right, be done here. I'm actually curious.
Go ahead.
Obviously, there's so much work that goes into these knives. Yeah. What's sort of the difference? Or like, what does it mean to create one of these sort of commoditized knives? So we're on this end of the spectrum of where you're forging, and this is all handmade and handcrafted, and the materials are pretty sort of specific, but like a meez or like a shun or a Wusthof, and no shame to those knives, but like, what is commoditized knife making? How does that differ from what you're doing?
I'll tell you. That's an awesome question, because so what we do is we're custom knife makers. So I will basically make what you want. Like, I have stuff on the website, faderknives.com. You can buy stuff direct, or we can do something that you want. What a big company they use machines. Every step of the process is they use machines. So a $150 knife is not touched by hands as much as it's touched by machines. The machines can only do certain things. Like There are machines that cannot, we could go to a company now, I have a design, I want you to make this into a mass market or a production run line. And I'll say, I want it to have this clip on the top, and I want to have bevels here, and I want to have this S grind here, and all this food release there. And what they'll say is, well, our machines can't do that. We can't do it and keep it at $150. So what a custom knife maker can do is they can make what you want. So I can round the spine. I can make it so when you're in the pinch position, you're much more comfortable. I can make it heavier on the bottom and lighter on the front. I can manipulate. I can give you a colorful handle that they can't do. I had to figure out ways in which, frankly, there was a celebrity chef who took one of my designs and brought it to one of his, flea bag companies. And I got a call from a knife maker friend of mine saying they're making your knives. And it was because they saw what I was doing on Instagram or through other people, and they were trying to make that knife. They couldn't do it. And that's just kind of the way it is. So when you're dealing with a custom knife maker, especially like us, is we have a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can do for our customers. And the price is a little bit higher than something you would get from like Wusthof or something like that. But you're also getting, you're getting someone you can talk to. Like you get email, we'll email you, we'll get you. I'll send you an email on Sunday morning,
Yeah, no, for sure. And then obviously there's different levels of, actually, I don't even know if it's commoditized, like something like a Nanox, which is a good quality knife. It's not $100, it's $350, $400, but it's not, I'm assuming it's also sort of mass produced.
Yeah.
Now what is the difference between sort of that very, very mass produced to something like a Nanox and I think we already know how a Feder knife is made now. So
frankly, I don't know. The answer is I don't know. The only company that has really done a very good job in terms of transitioning into making something as custom as possible, looking as custom as possible, and making that transition between and I am not, is Zwilling used Bob Kramer, who's one of the OG knife makers, and they did their version of his knives. In regards to the different qualities, steel's different, the production's different, the material's different. I can't really speak on production costs and stuff like that. But when you're dealing with a custom knife maker, you're getting a person who can.
Yeah. What for you has been the hardest culinary knife to make? I always think about how most serrated knives suck. But
that's my ball. That's my jam. I figured out how to do a serrate. I figured out how to make serrations so easy for me, and I've kind of helped too many knife makers learn how to do serrated knives. Serrations are easy, and when this is all over, I'll show you how easy it is. It's easy because the interesting thing about blacksmithing, bladesmithing, knife making, and cooking is it's problem solving. So how can you problem solve something efficiently? Serrated knives used to be like the hardest thing in the world. That is if I had to do 1,000 serrated knives, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I can do it. I can put an edge on a serrated knife 10 times more confident than a really thin chef knife. For me, we did a very long whippy smoked salmon knife. I did it's almost like 2 feet long. This thing is ridiculous, and it is like a noodle. Is that
the one that's like the beveled?
No, it's like a long slicer, but it's like 3/4 of an inch thick, but it's like 20 inches long. I'll get it out when it's done. Grinding this thing, because it was so thin and so flexible, it was like trying to grind a piece of spaghetti. It was brutal. So that would be, to me, that the longer and the thinner ones are harder to grind. And frankly, the harder to make knives are the ones with a super duper flat, straight edge.
Yeah. Well, I also noticed there's like different types of serrations. There's like, there's like teeth, there's like scallop ones. Right. There's is that just because of whatever material, whatever template they have, or?
That's the one part so you have scallops and teeth. I have to do the teeth just because I don't have the equipment or the machinery or the know-how to do that scallop thing, but that's definitely on the horizon. That's something I've always wanted to do. Serrated knives aren't hard, and it's just a question of figuring out a technique that works for you. And I actually, on my Instagram, there's a video on how I do the serrations.
Yeah. I'm curious, you're obviously a craftsman. Like you're not just making knives, you're constantly thinking about how to make them better. Is there like some sort of milestone or elusive thing you're trying to accomplish with your knife making that you haven't gotten to or that you're working towards?
I want to make a less expensive knife. I mean, that's more. I would rather have a more my knives are meant to be approachable, so I'd prefer to have something that people can have as opposed to something people can covet. A lot of knife makers make things they're almost like fetish items, and I would rather people use my knives. That's one of the reasons why 95% of the knives we make are stainless steel, because I don't want people to be intimidated by a price tag and then have to take out the white gloves and like put a shirt and tie on a top hat in order to cut their fucking dinner. In terms of the highlight, in terms of the biggest highlight we've had here is Jacques Pepin uses my knife. And in all his videos, he's got a grip of knives, a pile of knives, and he always goes for my knife, which is like, without question, that's the biggest highlight as a knife maker possible. And we don't pay him. We don't do any of that. He just grabs my knife, uses my knife all the time.
That's awesome. So, I mean, the most important question, I think, for today is, when is the Hattori Hanzo comparable sword coming out?
You know what? This is the thing. This is Forged in Fire is done to everybody. Everybody wants ninja knives. Everybody wants ninja knives. I teach bladesmithing class at the Center for Metal Arts, and we make friction folders, which is a forged all by hand knife, all by hammer, and I make them a little bit closer to that Japanese style tanto knife. At some point, I'm just going to have to make a samurai sword. I'm loath to do it, but at the same time, I want to make knives that people actually use. Like culinary knives there's nothing more satisfying than making something for someone to use to nurture and feed their family, and like to use and feed their family. So to me, I don't, that's maybe some down the line. I'll make one for you. How's that?
You know what? I don't know if I need a samurai knife.
No one needs a samurai sword. Nobody needs a samurai sword. They love it, though.
Speaking of Andrew Friedman, he's calling right now. We were just talking about that. He probably hears our podcast.
Is this live?
No, I'm kidding.
Jesus Christ.
So, the other thing I'm curious about, you have 2 podcasts.
Right.
Which is pretty, I mean, and they're pretty,
weekly.
Like, well known in your community. Like, what is the blade making community like? It seems like it's a pretty close knit,
Well, podcasting for me has always been. I've been in podcasting for about 13 years, and to me, growing up as a latchkey kid, I was home alone as a child, and I was scared. And the radio was a voice that was keeping me company. They weren't telling me what to do. They were telling me jokes. It was keeping me company and keeping me relaxed until someone came home. So, I usually say that Howard Stern and Don Imus were my surrogate parents.
Wow, Don Imus and Stern.
Well, I mean, I listened to my dad. I listened to whoever, but I mean, I was more of a Howard Stern guy. But I mean, I got pushed into whatever. I mean, I'm more of a Howard Stern. I listened to him yesterday or 2 days ago. So so podcasting to me became one of these things where I felt like I was with someone. So I got asked to be on Knife Talk, which is the #1 knife-related podcast on this German-infested planet. And we started doing it about 5 years ago. And there are a lot of guys who are in their shops. They have questions about knife making, like real tricky stuff. And then they shoot us a message. And then it's me and then Craig Lockwood of Chop Knives. He's a knife maker in England. Well, he lives in France. He's Welsh. And then Mareko Mamasi is one of the great knife makers in the country. He was a Forged in Fire champion. He makes knives for like the best of the best. He's probably one of the top 5 knife makers in the United States. So we get together every week and we'll answer questions. We'll tell dilemmas. We'll tell funny stories, lots of dick jokes, something to keep a lot of these guys company, because a lot of craftsmen and makers, they're solitary people. They're solitary people, and they maybe they have a job that they don't like, and maybe that their time alone is, they need company. They need someone to speak their language. So we have listeners knife makers from all over the world, except for Cyprus. We have a problem with Cyprus. That's another story. We had I wish this was a longer pod. I have the funniest.
I mean, can you give like the 50,000
This guy, we helped this guy in Cyprus for 4 years. He listened every week. We showed him how to make knives. He became a knife maker. And then when the Queen of England died, one of my partners is from Wales, so he wanted to eulogize the Queen just because it was part of his life. Well, this guy, after 4 years of using all of our information, decided he was going to stop listening to our podcast because of all the terrible things that England had done to the people of Cyprus. So my response was, then you can't make knives anymore, and all the information we've given you, you've got to give it back. So you've got to give it back. You're back to slingshots in the world in Cyprus. So there's a lot of bullshit and a lot of horse shit. And then I do the Full Blast podcast, which is makers in general, and I talk to makers about, it's not just knife making.
Oh,
it's just,
but within the medium of steel, or just generally?
Yeah, I talk to artists, I talk to photographers, it's basically the concept of creativity and how you got to the point of where does your creativity go on. So the interesting thing is there are people who, podcasting like yours is people want to hear your language, they want to hear you speak their language. So it's been a lot of fun and very rewarding. And I'm
curious with
go ahead.
So with Full Blast, you're talking with so many creators and everyone is, constantly iterating and creating. Is there any common denominators of things that after so many years, I find I think this might be the 40th podcast or close to the 40th. And I'm already seeing these common threads.
Yeah. What are the common threads that you're seeing?
So for me, a lot of what we talk about is entrepreneurship and creativity.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things that have been sort of common threads along the way with everyone is obviously surrounding yourself with really good people, and being really clear with your vision, being absolutely, crystal clear with why you're doing what you're doing so that your team can understand.
If you were to go deeper, the more unconscious, what would you say the more unconscious reason behind that is?
Well, I think that people want to have a purpose for being.
Validation.
Yeah, that too.
Everybody wants to, when you're making anything or being creative, we refer to it as executing creativity.
Mm-hmm.
If you can figure out a way to execute creativity, what you're doing is you're looking for some validation. Generally, with the maker community, it's all like the problems and the traumas of their childhood. It's all from not getting the validation from their family, and they're looking for validation from strangers. But at the same time, it's how do you find happiness?
That's so interesting you say that, because
I know what I'm doing, Josh. We've been doing this for fucking 13 years, my man.
I mean, it shows one, but we think about just being a chef.
Right.
There's so much narcissism in it, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about any artist, it's here's my thing. Here's my thing. And
right.
Yes, of course, we love the thing. But yeah, if you try to get through some of the bullshit, you're okay, but you could love something and not show anybody.
Well, see, that is when I was doing sculpture full time, I had interns and their parents would come to me and they would say, my son wants to be, or my daughter wants to be an artist. What is the reason? What should I tell them? And I said, it has to be a compulsion. It has to be the compulsion of, if I'm on a deserted island with no hope of rescue, am I going to still make sculpture? If the answer is no, then it ain't for you. So a lot of these things have to be self-satisfying, and they have to be, for me, it's changed. I'm about to be 50, and it's changed for me. And the buzz that I get isn't from making knives, but it's, am I able to be disciplined enough and execute organization and discipline in order for that to reach the goals of the day, of the week, of the month, of the year? And then that becomes my drug, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, but most of these guys, frankly, never mind.
No, it's this. I mean, this is, I love talking about this because it's, you have to have, I mean, you don't have to, but if you don't have craft and commerce, then, well, I mean, you need another job, right? On top of doing this, but so you have to have that compulsion. You have to love doing it no matter what. But if you don't have also some sort of desire to make people happy or create, build knives that are approachable, if you don't also have that, then you can be an artist in a garage and just do it for yourself. But then you got to have another job.
Well, but that might make you happy.
And it might make you happy.
Some of the best knife makers in the world, in the United States, master bladesmiths, a total high acclaim, and they don't want knife making to be their job because they don't want to lose the joy of they don't want to have to all of a sudden deal with customers and deal with the troubles, and they have their job and then they make what they want on the weekends. That makes it finding their joy, as opposed to, I don't need the validation by having a big company. I'll make whatever I want, and then you want it, you want it. You don't want it, I'm going to be a train engineer tomorrow. So there's finding joy is the most interesting thing. I do have a hot take for you, by the way. I'm convinced that this is the case about narcissism. I'm obsessed with it. I was raised by two narcissists. Here's a hot take. Narcissists don't like team sports. You know any narcissists who follow the Yankees or the Knicks or any sports? They don't like it. You know why? Because it's not about them anymore. It's not about them.
I would need some time to think about that.
All right. Well, then I won. Because if you need time to think, I know 5 narcissists are betting on the Jets this weekend. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't care.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one to. I ask people all the time. I ask almost every guest now.
Go ahead.
And so whether they're a writer or they're a chef, like the question changes a little bit, but for example, if you were a writer and you wrote the greatest book you've ever written, and you know that it's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, you know that it is, or you're a chef, you create the most incredible dish, it is the best, but no one else could read it, no one else could see it. You build the most incredible knife in the world. This has just like hit the pinnacle, but no one else other than you could ever see it.
Yeah.
Would it still feel the same?
I don't covet my work. And I learned at an early age as a sculptor that coveting your work is a mistake. And the reason why is because if you find something that you think is the masterpiece, what happens is you set this terrible guardrail in your brain that it's not going to get better than this, which is a terrible way to be creative. If you think that this is the best thing I've ever made, and you have to be able to take your work and get rid of it. So when I was making sculptures, there would be one sculpture that I really, really loved and I didn't want to sell. And the problem was I felt as though I realized that makes me think that I can't do it again or better. The key is I don't really think about stuff. I make it, and then I let it go. Because if you don't believe that the next one's better, you're out. You're out. So, and it doesn't mean the next one has to be better, but you need to know the potential that you can do this again, and you'll be just as happy.
I love it, man. Wise words. That's a good place for us to
I'm with you
to transition here. Where do people find you? How can a chef or anybody find your knives?
Fader Knives, FEDERKNIVES.com. I do a lot of bullshit on Instagram at Fader Knives. And I have 2 podcasts, the Full Blast podcast and Knife Talk. They're both very approachable. You don't have to be, you don't have to know everything in order to get it. Wherever you get podcasts. But Fader Knives on it, faderknives.com is where you can buy knives, or you can also send us a message if you want something specific. And we rarely say no. We say no sometimes. Like sometimes a guy will want something from a movie, like a ninja sword from a cartoon.
Like a Hattori Hanzo?
Like a cartoon. No, like a cartoon. Like a guy will say, hey, do you think you could make this movie from this? And we got to watch, you got to watch, 30 minutes in on episode 5 of this movie. You make that. I don't do that. We don't do. But
okay, no cartoon knives.
Whatever you want.
Awesome, man. This is great. Appreciate it. Thanks for having us in your knife home.
Josh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And I'm with you.
All right. Cheers.